We're going on a lot of things, so sorry.
This is sick. This is so sick. This will be my longest episode I've posted. Welcome back to the Future Self podcast. Welcome to season 4, episode 7. Another episode in Bali, another episode in Villo Studio with an amazing guest that I only met recently, but alignment can be a very fast-tracking and powerful thing. Before I introduce the guest, before I set the tone and we express a little bit more about who she is, why we're here and what we're doing, I want to start out with what I have been upkeeping, which is 10 rapid fire questions, okay?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Rapid fire meaning don't think about it too much, don't stress about your answer.
Yeah.
Just the first thing that pops in your head, okay? Number 1, what's more important to you, mental health or physical health?
Physical health.
Number 2, would you rather be loved or respected?
Loved.
Number 3, the burden of an overactive or an underactive conscious mind?
Overactive.
Number 4, would you rather feel consistently worried or consistently embarrassed?
Oof, consistently worried.
Number 5, what's more important, being your true self or being liked?
Being a true self.
Number 6, would you rather understand factual information better or the human emotions?
Human emotions, 100%.
Number 7, any famous person dead or alive, who would you want to meet?
Eckhart Tolle.
Oh. Number 8, what scares you?
Deep ocean.
Number 9, define your version of wealth in one word.
Happiness.
Number 10, who is Charli? You can elaborate on that.
Perfect. I was like, one word?
Who are you? Why are you here? Why are we sitting down? What's your backstory?
Charli is, I want to steer away from the generic answers of this, and I'd rather say I am passionate, I am emotional, and I am driven, I'd like to think. I'm introspective. I care a lot about other people. And I care about going deeper than surface level. The mundane and the kind of the generic stuff. While it's important, it does bore me a little bit. I'm a mindset coach, specifically in the authenticity and self-empowerment space. But in terms of my passions, I love learning, I love reading, I love psychology, I love music and movement and health in all aspects. I thought the rapid fire question about physical health and mental health, I was like, ooh, I can't pick between the two of them, but I sort of can, because the mind and body are so interrelated. So physical health is really important to me. And I feel like because mental health is such a vast and like, there's so many like intricacies of mental health. Sometimes if you tick the boxes of the easier stuff, and I want to say easier as in like the physical habits, sometimes it's easier for mental health to follow in good ways. So all things health and connection and expression and growth and evolution are my passions.
Not to put you on the spot, but why? Like, one thing I always notice is, and this is so general, but to categorize people, there's normally 2 categories of people. Those who are interested in diving deeper and those who aren't that interested by it or feel like they're unable to or just don't source going deeper.
Yeah.
Why do you feel like you're attracted and interested to the deeper, the connection, the depth, the authenticity, mindset, and self-development style of work?
Because I've seen what happens when you're not. I grew up around a lot of people who weren't willing to go deeper, and it's a bit of a slippery slope. Like, you can either be blissfully unaware and blissfully ignorant and just live your life like just cruising, or it can take a huge turn and people end up like adapting coping mechanisms that they don't even understand because they can't understand themselves. So I think it's both seeing other people go through things who are close to me, who I really love and care about, but also the interconnectedness. Like, we were kind of chatting about this the other day. People think that we're so individual because as a human vessel, like a body, a human being is individual too. You and I are different. But the interconnectedness of everything is like wild. So if I go deeper, even if the other person across the room from me is like, I'm just like cruising, I'm blissfully unaware with deep inner work of myself, I can encourage other people, even like inadvertently, to go deeper within themselves, or at the very least, if they don't want to, I can at least see them for more than behaviors or body language or all of the stuff that we sometimes, our egos love to box people in, like what you've said, oh, you know, there's either one or two kinds of people. I want to go beyond that because we're so, the world and human beings and everything is interconnected.
You know, do you know the story of the hero and the villain? The origin stories of the hero and the villain?
No, tell me.
So it's something I'm sure people who have tuned into my podcast have heard, because I think I quoted it an episode or two ago, but it's essentially saying that a hero and villain come from the same origin.
Ooh,
pain,
interesting concept, yeah.
Or trouble. So the hero says the world hurt me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let it hurt anyone else. The villain says the world hurt me. I'm going to hurt other people. Why go down the route, in quotations, of the hero? If you've experienced things from your past or seen things from your past that are more fitting or sitting in a darker light, why not go down a route of self-destruction? Why go the hero route and grow from that?
This is something I've actually spoken about with clients and also just people around me, because when you hear about someone's story, you're like, wow, if you've come from, like I've come from a family of addiction, and it would be really easy for me to use that and be like I'm in pain, I'm in physical pain, I've been through trauma, and I'm going to use that and like run with that. But I think it's an interesting one. I don't know whether there's an explanation in terms of like some people are either more inclined or they're not. I don't think it's as simple as that, but I think it's just like a deep knowing in myself that like that's not who I am in any capacity. And I'm able to feel and I'm able to like be the villain in some ways. Like I'm able to, of course, embody villainous traits where I'm like, I do feel self-deprecation and I do sometimes feel self-pity, but it's not as simple as being either the hero or the villain. And just because that's another thing, I think some people are like, maybe they've taken the route of like the villain or the hero or whatever it is. And human beings, we are fluctuating. If you've taken the route of the villain, it doesn't mean you can't redirect, and vice versa. I could wake up tomorrow and be like, you know what, I'm going to use methamphetamine. Like I wouldn't, but
you could.
But yeah, I could. I have every capacity or every possibility to turn around and redirect. And I think it's simply to answer the question of why I chose it even sounds odd to like box it in that way.
Yeah, it's not it's a bit hard because when you say those two statements, it's not necessarily an ego thing of I'm the hero, but it's that backing dynamic of the hero route is turning something negative into positive outcomes. The villain route is turning something negative into negative outcomes. So when I said that, it's not defining you as the hero, that you've been through one bad thing and now you're doing amazing things of charity. It's just that dynamic of something bad and you turn it into good or better outcomes.
Yeah, right. I think it's probably, again, my belief of the interconnected nature of everything and everyone. And if there are for the 10 people who are taking pain and contributing to more pain for themselves, and then obviously like if you're feeling shit about yourself, you're not going to be behaving in ways that are good for other people, or not as likely to behave in ways that are good for other people versus the 10 people who do experience pain and trauma as well, but take it and turn it into good. I think we all want more peace and love and happiness and like all the good stuff in the world. I think the point of life is to just, yes, like progression's great, and yes, success is great, whether like however people want to define that, whether it's material or emotional or freedom or adventure or whatever it is. But all of that stuff, I think, while it's important, I just think that the purpose of life is just to enjoy it as much as we can.
You said before that's not who you are. Is who you are genetically dictated or choice dictated?
Choice dictated. Because you can have all of the... See, I'm speaking from a very privileged point. I'm able-bodied. I'm although in saying that, I was with mental health diagnoses, they're kind of just like slapped on anyone. And yeah, I want to say 100% choice dictated. I was diagnosed with like a plethora of different mental health illnesses or mental health conditions. I want to say conditions because the connotation of illness sometimes is tough for people. But, and I was even put on medication for years for it. And I just woke up one day and I was like, I don't identify or like resonate with these labels anymore, and I don't want to take the medication, so I stopped.
One thing I've noticed a lot recently is the rise in ADHD diagnosis or claiming.
Yep.
And I've experienced it with people, or what I've researched and seen, that it can be grabbed and used not as an excuse, but a pathway that validates why something's done. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I get really stressed. Oh, it's just my ADHD. It's like, it's fair that makes you stressed, but it's not okay or good enough to just accept it. So if you know you get stressed because of ADHD, you can't just claim that that's who you are. You then, or my opinion would be, learn systems around how to manage the stress. So stress is part of who you are. You're aware of that. You can't just accept that. It's now finding pathways around it. I put up something, by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be weeks ago, on my social media about Chris Williamson explaining a female who was diagnosed with severe autism as a kid, couldn't speak up until the ages of 4 or 5. And she's now an accredited doctor that does research papers on autism and animals and her interests and whatnot. And it's a very interesting thing of, like you said, with the labels, she could have just grabbed on, oh, I'm slow, or I don't process things, or,
and latched onto it.
And latched onto it. I always struggle because I like that you said, I think privileged or able-bodied, because you don't experience that, and neither do I. I'm not someone who experiences ADHD or those things. So when I hear someone say, I do this because of this, so I get stressed because of ADHD, or I do this because of this, it's very hard for me to understand, how can you not just choose not to do that, or how can you not create systems around that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, is it the label that is jarring to you, or is it the fact that this person, like this hypothetical person, is like, I do this because of blah, 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 blah?
Yeah, so it's not even just with ADHD. There's so many things. It can be even like genetic things such as diabetes, or it can be people, smokers. Oh, I'm a smoker, that's just who I am, or that's just what happens, or I'm anxious, that's why I don't go to the gym. It's the idea that I can't relate or necessarily process not being able to do something from something. So it's different. Let's say you have one less limb. You clearly can't do something because you have one less limb. But when it comes to the mind and those diagnoses or those dynamics, I struggle to process that someone feels limited because of what they're said. So I have depression, that's why, I hang around in my room and I don't do everything all day. It's like, wait a second, depression doesn't automatically dictate
your behaviour.
Exactly that. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, it's a slippery slope, because, and in psychology, like, there's a fine balance between diagnoses and identification with a diagnosis. What you said was really interesting when you were like, I'm a stressed person, and that's just how it is. Are you a stressed person, or do you experience stress higher than the people around you, or like your perceived stress levels are more frequent than other people around you? And like, to someone listening, they might be like, that's the same thing. But how you speak matters, because if you turn around and say, I'm a stressed person, like I'm stressed all the time, the brain, like, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your brain doesn't want to challenge you on what you're talking about. If you say, I'm a really confident person, your brain's not going to be, you then almost like inadvertently change your behavior subconsciously to fulfill what you're saying or what you believe. And that's why it's really important to kind of like break things down properly when you have negative beliefs about yourself or the world. It's like, okay, what's the validity of these words? Because while, yes, I'm not by any means saying that diagnoses are not legit.
Yeah, of course.
People who experience or have the diagnoses of ADHD or depression, anxiety, anything else are like completely valid, completely fair. And I'm not an accredited psychologist to be able to pluck away a label and be like, no, you're not that. You're just experiencing this. That would be super insensitive. But I think that there is a balance of that. And it's okay to be like, I have the diagnoses of ADHD or anxiety or whatever. I feel or I experience feelings of blah, 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 blah. But that's not your identity as a person. It's not, I am stressed. I feel stressed. I experience stress. And again, like, this could be so twisted to turn it into something that is insensitive, and that's not my intention at all. But all I'm saying is it can be a very slippery slope if you identify too much with a diagnosis or what you experience. You can like perpetuate that.
I agree. And as an example of the words you speak, I remember for so long I would say I have a small podcast, because the reality is it is. But when I spoke like that, the opportunities that I sourced or saw were completely different from when I spoke saying I have a growing or a bigger podcast.
Absolutely.
So when I would say I have a small podcast, I would think, so I'm not going to invest X amount into new gear, or I'm not going to reach out to that large following guest, or I'm not going to, bite my tongue and just approach that person to talk to, versus when it's, I have a growing podcast or it's getting bigger, you instantly think, no, I need to invest this money because if I want a big podcast, that's what a big podcast would do or needs. So language is it's a very interesting thing.
And that's what I was saying when I'm like, when I said that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say, of course, like when you were saying, I have a very small podcast, inadvertently, subconsciously, you're changing your behavior to reinforce that. Whereas if you're saying, I'm working on building my podcast, I'm growing my podcast, I have a growing and upcoming podcast, then inadvertently and subconsciously, because you've spoken those words, it's important and you're telling yourself that stuff, then you're going to be more resourceful. You're going to be more on the lookout for opportunities, kind of like the red car theory.
Yeah.
And that's all like the reticular activating system in the brain, which I think it's RAS for short, and everyone's completely around that in this space, I'd think. But if you're not, it's to do with how our brain filters out like millions of pieces of information, and we're always taking in information, but the stuff that actually reaches your conscious brain is minuscule in comparison to everything you're taking in. And if you're looking for a red car, or if you're wanting to buy a red car, or like looking for opportunities, and you're saying that I can have opportunities, it's going to be filtered out. Your brain's an incredible thing that will just like be like, yeah, you're thinking about this, here you go. That's why if people are stuck in like the negative thought loops with depression, or even like the ADHD example where they're like, I feel anxious or I can't do this because of ADHD, they're going to find more reasons to validate that. Yeah.
So I have this thing that I do with my clients in calls, which is pretty much the red car theory, but in a smaller setting. Count how many blue things are on this table. Okay, now look at me. How many green things were there? And you can't say, right?
Yeah, because your brain's filtering out,
The way you think and speak matters. It alters your reality.
So, like we were saying before, if you're looking for negative and you speak negative into the world, and about yourself, about other people, your brain wants to validate that, and your reticular activating system will filter out like all of the millions of pieces of information, pluck out the negative stuff because that's what you're looking for, and be like, yeah, here you go. And then inadvertently, again, your subconscious behavior changes to validate or perpetuate your thoughts, because the human brain, like, we like to be right. So if you're like, by the same token, if you're thinking good into the world and positive stuff, then you're going to see more positive stuff. You're going to behave in more positive ways. That's by no means either being like, I'm not feeling great today, and like the toxic positivity kind of things. Just like, there's a very fine line between suppressing and redirecting. But yeah, I think it's once you learn the skill of noticing how you can gently redirect, it's really powerful.
Let's say someone's living a life with a negative bias view stronger than someone who's opportunistic.
Mm-hmm.
Because being a human, we are programmed negatively biased to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
How would you help someone, or what's a bit of advice you would give to someone to start looking for these red cars?
The red cars being the positive things?
Yeah.
I would say neurologically, the things that are hardwired into our brains, yes, are to look for threats, because we're made to survive. Like, our brains want to help us survive. But like that neural circuit, it's like a muscle. Like, you go to the gym, you train, you build muscle. If you train the same muscle group, it's going to get stronger. If you continue to redirect thoughts, and even though it might feel so unnatural and so just foreign at first, look for the positive red cars, look for the positive things, and continue, just make it a habit to even just journal in the morning, or speak positively with your friends, or anything like that. It strengthens neural circuits that if you want to be more positive, then you have every capacity to do that. It just takes consistency, and it does take time as well.
I love the analogy comparison to the gym, or it being a muscle.
Yeah.
And another level of depth to that statement is that when you start the gym, you don't start 2-hour-long sessions, squat, deadlifts, and all these complex movements. So when I reverse it back to what we're talking about with seeing things to be positive and training that muscle, it might not be identifying 10 things and completely altering your perception and then just drilling that in. It could be starting with seeing one thing, or thinking one different thought. Like the gym, you might go for 30 minutes your first time, and then the next time you go for 60 minutes, and then you build that. Then you get to a point where it is just consistency and progressive overload to train that muscle. Same with the brain. It starts with the smaller things, and then it can become more complex thoughts, and then you're consistently training that muscle. Our sense of self is largely derived from our results and actions, the doing, and rightly so.
I believe there was a second part to that statement. I think it was, and rightly so. However, the striving, the doing, all of that stuff, as much as it is important, and our sense of self is derived by our job, our friends, our family, our passions. If you take all of that away, like if you just strip it all down and you're just yourself, who are you otherwise? And I think that stuff is really important, like to get to the crux of things, because when you begin to do the deep work of stripping away the conditioned values and beliefs and the things that you identify with, how many of them are actually yours? And once you figure that out, then you can kind of like adapt and be like, okay, like I thought that, you know, like this material success was a really high priority in my life, but actually it's freedom because I want to travel. How can you adapt your life to actually align with your values in that way? Because I think that there's so much emphasis on the doing, which is perfect for some people. But even for those people, I think it's really important to take moments of pause and be like, without this, would I be happy? And if so, why? If not, why?
I love perspective, because when I read that quote from you,
Tell me your
I
thoughts.
took a completely different route.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very big on a system called stacking your resume.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who do a weight loss challenge, and they've done it multiple times. They've lost the weight, put it back on, lost the weight, put it back on. They don't necessarily have a resume stacking that they can trust themselves, or that they are able to do something long term.
Yeah.
Their resume is stacked that I do fail. I do fall into these cycles. So when I read that from what you wrote, I read it as resume stacking, that doing things, doing things creates your sense of self.
Absolutely.
Because you have the resume backing behind you. So people always ask me, how did I know I could travel the world solo and running a business? It's like, well, I didn't at face value because I'd never done that before. But I had a resume of so many experiences that I could trust myself. I could run a business on public holidays and special events and on a Friday night and on a Sunday and when I'm tired and when I'm sick and all these things.
Yeah.
I can run a business where people are starting and people are stopping and things are frantic and things are smooth. I could also train consistently whilst running a business. I could run a business as well as investing in other areas. I could work on a relationship as well as running a business and training. So I had this resume stacked of, I can control multiple things. I am capable to manage multiple things. And that for me, I could draw back on my resume and be like, well, I can trust myself. I do believe in myself. I can call myself out when needed, but I can also support myself when needed too. So I took that of what you wrote as stacking your resume. The more things you do, it more defines who you are. But again, I love that
our perspectives are so
different.
different because of our life experiences, or not even, I mean, yes, life experiences, but maybe the way we perceive things is different.
For a third perspective on that, have you ever been doing things that could define you as something, but you feel completely not related to that?
Absolutely. This is going to be interesting for you too, because I think it's normally a shock for people. Growing up in a family of addiction, I got to a point it was really unsafe at home, like big time. I was working 4 jobs, still not making enough, and my mum was raising us as a single mum at that point, and a hurt single mum. So obviously the ideas that were projected about like men were very black and white and not balanced and not fair, but hurt people will project things. And I ended up doing a job that was quick money, and was completely against all of my values, morals, all of that, but home was really unsafe. Like I was not able to stay there. And that's hard, because when you have to go completely against your morals and your values and everything that you identify with as a human being, I think you learn to, you grow thick skin, but you also, you become a lot more empathetic, I think, to when people do things that they feel like don't align with them.
Is the job undisclosed? Personal,
Undisclosed?
private? Like,
It's not, but I don't know if your podcast, I was a stripper. I was a dancer.
yeah. You can share whatever.
Yeah.
My first initial episodes, I used to say fuck every third word.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
cool.
There's no
Yeah.
censor or nothing like that.
No, that's totally fine. So I ended up,
Wow.
I was 19 and stripping, and oh, actually no, I was 19 or 18. I think I carried over into 19. And I was doing that for 6 months, just making as much money as I could, along with the 4 other jobs I was doing, which were babysitting, restaurant management, dog walking, and another cafe.
Multi-diverse.
And then there was a swimming teacher gig as well.
Okay.
So very diverse. But yeah, it was very character building. Highlighted a lot of things that I would hear my mum say, and I'm like, that's true. Like I can't trust men as a whole. So it was difficult coming out of it. But as soon as I stopped, like as soon as I had enough money to get out of home, got my first place, and like I felt at peace, and I just left everything that that didn't align. I felt free, but I also felt really, really humbled by the experience too, because I think a small part of me as well was like intrigued by it because there was such a stigma around it, and that's something I really, maybe it's like that the hereditary side of my family, like with pushing limits. In their case it's addiction, but for me it was like more pushing social stigmas and like wanting to learn more about this stuff. But when you're immersed in it, it's very hard to break away and like look at it, things objectively.
Before that job, were you confident and outgoing, or did you become confident and outgoing as a result of that job?
I think that it was a bit of both. I was a really, really, really anxious kid. I got to the point where I couldn't, like that. This is when, before they put me on medication, I got to a point where I couldn't leave the house. As like a 7-year-old, I was just too anxious, so fearful of the world and people. And so they put me on medication. And anyone who's been on a high dosage of like antidepressants and just this cocktail of different things knows you don't feel bad. Like you don't feel the emotions that you were feeling, but your base level is like, you could have told me, oh, mum just bought a pony for you, and I'd have the same reaction as like, this dog just died. So it's I started very, very, very anxious, but as I got older, like living around the things that I was living around, it's kind of like either adapt or that whole thing of like you're gonna survive. Like you have to, your brain wants you to survive. So I became outgoing as a result of that, but I think it was very surface level outgoing. And then I got to a point where I was kind of like, no, I feel very aligned with being social and all of that stuff. But when I did go into that industry, it very quickly, like, it is a facade, you're a fantasy. And that was really tough for me because obviously I do mindset, like especially in authenticity and empowerment, being inauthentic, it's really difficult. And when you're performing to that level as well and going against everything in your body, it's tough. I think I learnt to, sounds really bad, but I learnt how people's psyches work more. And I saw all different types of people. Some of them actually really lovely people, like really, really lovely. Some that like I wouldn't talk to no matter how much money they were offering me for a dance. I just wouldn't. But I think in a sense it made me more outgoing, but it also made me a lot less. It made me more like outwardly outgoing, but a lot more internally kind of hesitant.
That's your relatability factor that we were talking about the other day.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
because you've been inauthentic to yourself.
Yeah.
And now you're
Hugely.
authentic to yourself and you want to teach authenticity in people. And that's why when we were talking, I think relatability is massive because if you've been, I say this almost every episode, so sorry for everyone that's listening, but I'm a big anti-alcohol advocate, especially mostly binge drinking. I have people in my life who drink socially and occasionally and that's whatever, but I'm massively against binge drinking because I've been a binge drinker before and I know what that experience is like. I share that I've been that because that's a relatable factor. And I think relatability is the easiest way for people to connect. So when we were talking the other day about being not scared about being relatable, but it not holding
enough
prominent,
weight. Yeah.
enough weight to do so, I feel like that's your backing. So for instance, I've had people try to strip away my achievements in my life, either like lucky or, you know, all those things. And it's like, no one can ever do that because of where I've come from. So I've come from a family where mum was on Centrelink and then a binge drinker doing drugs. My father passed away when I was younger. So now all these things I'm doing, obviously self-accomplished, but they're my relatability, but also my resume of you can't
use that as an excuse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people can't also say that what I preach or teach isn't possible. So when I say future self, put in the work and show up for yourself, I worked for 3 years, 7 days a week, and now I'm traveling the world online coaching. So it's like having that resume to also, because when we were talking, it was that idea. The question I asked you was, why would I coach with you? And it's like, if you have a resume that shows that development, right?
But to turn around and be like, why would you be coached by me? I was an ex-stripper. Like, I don't know.
An inauthentic is what you can
Yeah.
take away from that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's probably some people that are strippers that want to get out of the gig.
Yeah.
But it's that idea that you were once living a life not authentic to you.
Mm-hmm.
You changed that and now you are. So it's not at face value, the relatability factor of what you were doing to what you're doing now. It's that dynamic of, why would I coach with you if you're an authenticity coach? It's like, well, wait a second. You lived
I've been
years.
Very inauthentic.
Very inauthentic. And you've learned now the power of being authentic. We can take challenges as either inspiration to grow or a reason to remain the same.
Everyone's been through trauma. No one's special in that way. I think that sometimes the easier route is to take trauma as an excuse to be like, I'm just going to run with this, like this happened to me, and not actually feel it, but talk about how horrible it is, and then continue a cycle of coping mechanisms to either keep you in that state, because the ego loves to attach to patterns, specifically negative, and like that's the easy route, because then you become special, right? Like if you attach yourself to something and you're like, woe is me, that makes you more special than the people who are doing good, or you get more love, more attention, more whatever you might subconsciously be looking for, but you actually don't feel it. Or you go through trauma like every other person in the world, and you be courageous, you face it, you feel it, and understand as well that feeling isn't like a linear thing. It's not trauma happens, you feel, and then you get over it and you're all good. It might come up like 10 years down the track and you have to re-feel. Things might trigger you and you re-feel. But feeling and then being like, okay, I can feel that this doesn't feel pleasant, this doesn't feel good, and what can I do about it? Do I want to keep feeling this way? No. Or like, do I want to experience this for a really long time, or just for the time that it sits in my body, let it pass, and then continue on with doing something that makes me feel good and puts good into the world? That's what I meant by that.
Is trauma an advantage or disadvantage to life?
It can be both, depending on perspective. Perspective is everything. Like, again, and this is the thing that ego loves to attach. And when I say ego, I think people assume it's bad. It's not. Ego, like, we need it. But you can either attach to your downfalls, and again, like the self-fulfilling prophecy, it perpetuates, or you can attach to your successes, and sometimes that's not always a good thing either. So it's like a fine balance between the two, or acknowledging both and just being.
If you had a choice then to go through the traumas that you went through, or to be able to not, what would you choose and why?
I'd go through every single one of them, probably feel them more deeply and acknowledge them more deeply, because it would mean that the work I have to do later on is maybe a little bit less, but the reason being that everything that I've experienced in my life, everything you've experienced with your dad, your mum, everything that we have come up against in our lives make up the product of our psyche now. And that'll continue to happen. In 10 years' time, everything that's happened will have been a big part of who we are. And while I don't think that that's saying like, oh, you know, everything happens for a reason, I used to really believe that. I think now I don't believe that it happens for a reason. I believe that we can make a reason out of it.
Fair.
And I believe that we can learn things from it. But for me to tell you, sit across from the table and be like, oh, your dad died for a reason. That, like, I can't sit here and say that I believe that fully. When trauma occurs in someone's life or bad things happen, I think it's insensitive to be like, that's happening for a reason. Like, you're all good. Don't worry about it. But if you choose to be like, okay, this really shit situation's happened, I can either turn it, like, I think it's more about adaptability and flexibility with that, and also coming to terms with the fact that shit things happen. Sometimes it's nice for us to tell ourselves, I can make this into a reason. Not everything happens for a reason, not necessarily, you know, like, my family's riddled with addiction for a reason. Like, this is for the cause of greater good for me, but it's happening. I don't know what the reason is. There might not be a reason, but I can create my reality from that. I can create a reason from that. And it can either be like productive to my general well-being and health and others, or it can be unproductive and perpetuate.
I interestingly agree and disagree at the same time, like 51% to 49%.
Tell me.
Just in the sense that I think that everything happens for a reason. So I've got it tattooed on me.
I can't believe I didn't notice that.
But I also very much agree with it might not happen for a reason, but you tie a reason to it. And from my perspective, I think that is just as purposeful. Yeah. So again, my father didn't pass away for a reason in someone's eyes, but in my eyes, I'm like, yeah, but that put me on this pathway to impact thousands of other lives. So that seems like a reason to me. Yeah. But I also heavily agree on the point of if something bad happens, I'm not up in someone's grill going, oh, it's for a reason, it's for a reason. Yeah, like shit things don't just happen, it's for a reason. I'll always say to someone, it will make sense in time. Yeah. But yeah, very interesting, because I haven't even thought of it like that. It's kind of conflicting in my own brain where I do think things happen for a reason, but then I also do think that we can just put a reason to it for it to make sense.
Can I ask you then, at the risk of sounding like really abrasive and blunt, did your dad pass away and then you created a reason for it? Or did your dad pass away and you're like, this has happened because I'm not meant to continue like X direction?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it both of those perspectives are so right in their own sense. Yeah. I was 12. It was depression, suicide, so self-chosen. Yeah. I didn't sit there once my mum told me and be like, oh yeah, like for a reason. Yeah. But I so heavily now agree that it was for a reason. Yeah. So that then also plays on that perspective of it makes sense in time. So at the moment I wasn't like, this happened for a reason. Something good.
I just need to wait. Yeah.
I think like that now though. So if someone dear to me was to pass away now, I instantly, from my past experience, I would instantly think that's happened for a reason, or it will make sense to me in time. Yeah. But yes, no, I didn't think that initially, but I so heavily do now. With the impact I make to people, who I am, the things I'm doing, I do think that it did happen for a reason.
Do you think that it would be harder for you not to think that?
That is a great question. Are you saying in the sense that human beings put a purpose to something so it feels a bit lighter?
Grief is really complex, really, really complex. And I think that when horrible things happen, I'm by no means insinuating that there's a right or a wrong way to do grief. But I think that like it's easier for us to be like, this is happening for a reason. This will make sense. And that's a really beautiful way to look at things. And I'm like, that is one thing. I'm 100%, not one thing. I'm on board with a lot of things you say, Guy, don't worry. But Yeah, I think that I catch myself sometimes, especially when like you're reminded of things with family. Like I just found out some stuff the other day and I'm like, this is okay. Like this, like if this happens and it's all good. And then I kind of caught myself in that and I was like, am I telling myself because it's easier to think that? And I don't have an answer. And maybe there's not one definitive answer, but I thought I would pose it to you.
It's a fucking great question. Firstly, I appreciate your ability to ask it without hesitation. Sometimes I want to be asked certain questions because I don't like just speaking about things that off the cusp. It's nice to have it directed. I'm someone that's very strong on ownership. And I think I've used that as something to create a purpose in situations. So, for instance, if I got cheated on, I don't sit there and go, that's my fault. But
I contributed somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the reason I do that is like, what else can you do? You can't sit there and think, oh, I got cheated on, life sucks, this is awful. It's like until you take ownership of something, nothing will change. So even people with weight loss, they could have put on weight because of a messy divorce. Until you sit there and go, no,
what's my part in this?
exactly, my actions, my thoughts, and my systems I created allowed me to put on weight. Nothing will change. So. I probably could have put a purpose there for protection, but like the idea I have is what else can you do? I can't sit there and poor me and poor my family and this sucks and I wish it didn't.
But you don't want to, right?
I say you can't in the sense of that's just not me.
Yeah.
Like I can't not be moving forwards. And I don't want to sit there for 20 years with this regret of, oh, what was the point? It was pointless. Bad things just happen. It's like, well, yeah, no, I have to tie a purpose to it for a good outcome or for a progressive outcome to come about.
Can I ask, when you say you have to tie things to a certain outcome to make it good, how often or when was the last time you actually allowed yourself to be like, this is shit?
Yeah, I'm not single-sided where I don't feel like that. Like recently, from things that have gone on in my family too, I've actually started feeling a lot of pity for myself and my family just for having gone through that with my dad. And then we were in a car accident when we were kids and my sister almost passed away and all these things. And my family at times tends to be the one that just cop the shit. Shit things from other people, either like picked on social media or called out, or it's just it's been a very interesting thing to process that we've been through so much. Why is life still so heavy towards us in certain things?
Do you feel like you're owed peace now, you guys?
No, not owed. It would be nice.
Yeah.
It would be nice. I don't think owed peace, but the level of hostility.
Yeah.
So, like, I cop a lot of stuff back at home because I was, and not to sound arrogant or egotistical, the tall poppy. Like the coach on the South Coast, no one was doing what I was doing, work as hard as I was.
People don't like that. Hey.
People don't like that, no. But in my head, the idea I have is, fuck, man, I've been through this, like father passing away, bad sicknesses in the family, first partner cheated on me, like all these things. It's like, why am I still copying so much shit from so many people? But putting purpose to things is what allows exactly. So strengthen to move forwards. Because if I sit there and I will feel pity for the family, but then I also think like, no, dude, everything I've been through is created who I am.
Yeah.
And I fucking adore who I am. So I can sit there and feel shit things or feel, yeah, this situation sucks, but I can't stop the sentence there.
Yeah.
That's a comma, and then the sentence has an ending of, okay, now what can we do to move forward?
How long did it take you to get that mindset or like kind of cultivate that for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would dare say since I was 12, but I experienced one situation of being like verbally abused from someone that I cut off.
Yeah.
And then that got more intense. And then from there, I stopped taking shit from anyone. But
like,
that then created hostility with other people. So then I became very cutthroat, even with friends and family. Like I just don't take shit from anyone. Even if adore my mum. She's about to be in Bali tomorrow.
Oh.
But even if she was to just really heavily project things onto me, I'm so self-protective. I'd be like, fuck this. I don't deserve this and I don't need to sit in this.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was your question? What was the statement you said?
I've been so immersed in what you're saying.
Yeah, so I just went on a little tangent.
Keep going on it though.
Yeah, so becoming so self-protective with things.
That you're just ruthless. You're like, no, I don't need to deal with it.
Yeah. So when I have a friend recently who had another friend really cut them deep, and that friend just wanted me to sit there and listen to how they were feeling and what the situation was. But instantly in my mind, I'm like, just cut them off.
So, yeah, that's interesting. That when you said that the comma, it's not, this is shit is not a full sentence. There's a comma and there's a break. But then for other people, you find it frustrating to like listen to other people experiencing things without being like, here's your solution, cut it off. Like,
yeah, not so much frustrating, but agitating.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily project frustration like fucking hell, just whatever. Don't listen to me, do it yourself. But it's that agitation of if someone's doing wrong by you, just cut them off.
Yeah.
Like I think, I used to be a previous perfectionist to a very high degree, also avoidant attachment style. So everything's intertwined, right? Yeah, everything becomes very connected. So I think also from my father, I have this switch where if someone does wrong by me, I can flick the switch and it just won't turn back on, regardless of who it is.
Yeah.
And that's a very helpful but very negative trait that I've worked very hard on, trying to allow the switch to flick back and forward.
Does it scare you?
Does what scare me?
The fact that you just said that the switch will flick off and it just won't turn back on.
You know those situations where something shit happens and you just wish it didn't happen? So for instance, if a friend of yours, you found out they were talking shit about you and now that trust is fucked and you just like, you just think, oh, I wish that didn't happen. That happens to me with the switch where it's like, fuck, I wish that didn't happen. But it's not as if I flick the switch and I'm sitting there, you know the movie Get Out, where he sinks back into his brain and he can't come back in? It's not as if I'm in that scenario where I'm wanting to flick the switch, but I can't.
You're just like, I have no desire.
Exactly, yeah. Once it's flicked, something chemically in my brain's like, yeah, that's fine.
Avoidance.
It's done and continue to move on. That's they're great questions. Great questions. I love that. People always tiptoe around those types of questions.
What's the point?
I agree. I very much agree. Too many people focus on their weaknesses and try to strengthen them, when sometimes it is more productive to discover your strengths and build on them more.
So there's research, I don't know the exact number of hours, but it's, I think, very significantly larger than the amount of time it takes to build on strengths. If you focus on a weakness and you try and build a weakness, it'll take you way longer to get up to par or like get strong with that weakness than it would to identify your strengths and then be like, cool, there might be however many people with these same strengths, but they're not focusing on them. If you focus on the strengths, then you can get up to a level that's like, okay, I can use these to create virtually whatever you want.
What do you think, or when do you think it's appropriate to sit strong on what your strengths are versus that just being an outcome of you avoiding what your weakness is and not wanting to face that?
I think that awareness, self-awareness and humility is the antidote to that. I think that self-awareness and humility is the antidote to being able to be like, okay, these are my weaknesses and these are my strengths. And if you have enough self-awareness, you know in yourself when you're like, I'm going to use the strengths because I'm going to avoid what makes me feel weak because it feels vulnerable, it feels scary, it makes me feel bad about myself. Or when you're like, strategically, I think I'd really enjoy and really benefit from using my strengths compared to my weaknesses right now. And if you have the self-awareness and humility to be like, you know what, would be great to use my strengths right now, but I think it's actually better, like beneficial for me or for the situation to handpick a weakness and build on that and use that.
That's great for someone who has something that I would call a bullshit meter, right? A strong bullshit meter where you can call yourself out.
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't have that strong bullshit meter, how would you guide someone, or what would you say to them to develop a stronger bullshit meter?
It's really difficult with things like this because if someone has the self-awareness, or even when people have self-awareness, the way I coach at least and how I try and live my life, even in my personal life with people, I'd rather ask questions instead of tell you, because again, the brain loves to validate. Like, you want to be right, you want to be smart, and I'm not posing questions in a way that is like, hey, I know best, because at the end of the day, if I ask you a question and I think I know the answer, I've not experienced what you've experienced, and you're the expert in your own in your own life, and I only get a snippet, or only get to perceive a snippet of what you're telling me, and what you're telling me might not even translate into what you're actually meaning, but I perceive it from the lens of my emotional background and my beliefs. So I don't know that then, but I think the best way you can guide someone is to pose questions with either of the two things, depending on dynamic. Pose a question and listen properly with curiosity and openness and a willingness to understand what their experience is like. And the other side being like very direct, and sometimes being like, why this? Okay, why that?
Do you know of something called onion peeling?
Like Shrek onions.
You say Shrek?
Yeah.
So
Ogres are like onions.
Oh, actually, sorry, I didn't get that reference.
You were like, what?
Pop culture reference will be my downfall.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's a weakness. We don't have to use it. It's
Yes,
fine.
yes. Onion peeling, I've never heard that reference before, but I'm pretty sure it's bang on.
Yeah.
Is where, you ask a question and you get a surface level answer. But if you
Like,
want
tell
to
me more.
know,
Why?
tell me more. Yeah, I love the question why. Asking the question why enough times to find something out that's very deep. Shrek. That's that's funny.
That's a slippery slope too, though, right? Because like people use overanalyzing things as an avoidance mechanism too. People, myself included, in the past have often been like, oh yeah, like this has happened and I feel this way because of this in my past, and that happened because of this, and that's the reason why this, and it's all in an effort to avoid actually feeling. So you psychoanalyze and you analyze reasons and ask why and why and why and why and why, because you're trying to avoid actually experiencing whatever you're experiencing.
Do you psychoanalyze people?
Not intentionally. It's a natural thing that I do, absolutely. Do you?
Yeah.
I can tell you're psychoanalyzing me. The first time we spoke, I was like, he's analyzing me, but it wasn't like a conscious thing, I don't think. But it's fine because I was psychoanalyzing you too.
Yeah, I like psychoanalyzing people is a way for me to validate assumptions or pathways. So I met this.
It's a really honest thing to say.
Yeah, I met this friend of a friend, and when I was talking to her, I assumed in my head she had a rough relationship with her father. So I was like, I want to kind of just probe without, because I didn't know her personally. Yeah. I just sensed things and my brain put that together. And then when I asked questions, and I wasn't psychoanalyzing, like, tell me what attachment style you are and all these things, but I'd ask questions and then I ended up finding out her relationship with her father is very shit. So yeah, I don't psychoanalyze necessarily with a negative intent of, I want to quickly get to the root of this person, but I like being curious. I'm very curious. Yeah.
Because you want to connect, right?
Connect or understand or validate what I feel like I know.
You know, that's interesting. So I'm assuming based on your interest or your curiosity with people, like the dad one, for example, your relationship with your father might not have been peaceful or the best. Strained?
Good perspective. No, it wasn't. He was
Really?
best friend.
That's beautiful.
Great perspective though. Just to define when I say what I know meaning what I've learnt about humans or the research I've put into.
Yeah.
So the study I've put into a female's bad relationship with their father normally shows this trait or this thought process or these actions. So yeah, along the lines of what I've learnt, and then I can validate what I've learnt to be real, even with small things like if I have an argument with my best mate, I'll in my head think, if we're arguing about a topic of business, because I've been in business for 5 or 6 years, he's been in business for a year or two. If I say something and he snaps back, I'll psychoanalyze like, oh, that snapback came from insecurity. And then I will probe the question a little bit, and then it'll end up turning out, he's like, yeah, man, it's just a topic I'm really embarrassed about. And like, so much, I got really anxious. So in my mind, it validates, okay, I can, like what I know does make sense and what I know is truthful. And that helps with coaching when it comes to pre-predictions or knowing how people might act from certain outcomes. So then I can either work with that pathway that I know they're walking on, or on the second one with the hindsight knowledge, knowing that they're walking. So for instance, someone overweight whose relationship with food is pretty average. I might have a few pathways that I could walk with the hindsight knowledge of they're either rewarded with food as a kid, they've either gone through something and they've felt comfort, felt comfort with food, or it's something that they just celebrated themselves. So I can then walk those pathways while they walk their one. And having that hindsight knowledge, I can almost
walk parallel.
And preempt when they'll say things or question them. I have a client who has that kind of relationship, and I told him to go to a fast food chain this week. And he was so stressed and worried about it. And my idea behind it was trying to show him that the work he's done, he can go to a fast food restaurant.
And it's not going to all be undone.
Exactly. And it's not going to be a big shit show. So that's like that. If I didn't psychoanalyze, I wouldn't be able to help with coaching in that level of depth. It would just be me being like, yeah, go eat takeout because a refeed or a cheat day. It's like, no, eat takeout because I've analyzed this might be your relationship with food. By doing this, we can teach you this and it leads to a better outcome.
Yeah, incredible.
If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Why?
Because kind of similar to what we were saying with like when bad things happen, if you can't change, if you wake up in a war-ridden country, which is a very extreme thing, and I'm like fully aware that there are horrendous things happening in the world right now, and it's very easy to talk about it from this privileged position when we're sitting across a table with like access to all of the things we have, but on an individual level, if you can't change a circumstance that you're in, like maybe the more trivial things, because the war-ridden stuff is like, that's intense and I can't relate to that. But if you change circumstances that you have no power over, and often in our society, like the privileged society that we're in, there are ways we can change things. But if you're in an extreme situation that you can't change, I'm not saying you have to do the thing where you're like, oh, everything's fine, where there's like the fire burning in the background. You know that meme?
Yeah.
But through acceptance, even like with really horrible things, sometimes acceptance, not in the fact that accept and then lie in defeat and like be like, I'm doomed to this forever, but acceptance of the present moment, being like, this is shit, this is horrible, and I'm not enjoying it, is better than the resistance and being like, this is not happening, like, why is this happening? If you come to accept things, that's a change in the way you think that might bring a tiny little bit more peace than if you were to resist.
Whether you say you can or whether you say you can't, you are right. And that stems back to what I was talking about before with the either ownership or acceptance. Life doesn't, I'll have to stand 10 toes on saying this, because you caught yourself then by saying, oh, accept it, oh, but don't, like, you can't just accept it with the fire in the background. But in a certain way,
you kind of can, yeah.
It kind of has to, because if you don't, that's okay, but nothing's going to change. If you don't always have to take ownership necessarily, but if you don't accept the circumstance or process it, it won't change. And that's why you see 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old alcoholics or smokers or drug takers is they just haven't accepted a situation. So although it would be nice and somewhat politically correct to be like, oh, if there's a fire behind you, you can't just accept it, but you have to, because otherwise you're going to stand in that spot and the fire is either going to creep closer or you're not going to move anywhere.
Yeah. I think what I meant by that, when less about like not accepting it and more about being in denial, like just being like, oh, everything's fine, like everything's good. No, you're allowed to be realistic and be like, this sucks, but but I accept it. Like, I surrender to it, to this current like circumstance. And like I said, people have a really negative connotation around the word surrender because they think that that's weakness. They think that that leaves you vulnerable, and in a sense it does, but it also means that there's room for change or room for movement or room for flexibility. So yeah, in that sense, it's less about like not accepting the fire in the background, but just more accepting that it's there, rather than just denying and being like, no, it's all good, we're groovy.
That vulnerability is strength thing is so interesting. And I love those scenarios where you'll either see someone who's in a gang or in jail or whatnot, and they'll either find a religion or they'll come to another side and be like, no, like Mike Tyson's a great example. People initially when he was younger saw him as a fearless, relentless, super strong, but he now talks about himself in a third perspective of he was scared, he was weak, he was all these things.
Beautiful.
A lot more strength now in his vulnerability to do that than the thought to see strength when he was younger.
I think that's really interesting that, and I think it actually is a lot harder for men because of the way that you're, like the kind of the values and the expectations that we're like kind of we have instilled in us from childhood are very different as males and females. And I think vulnerability, like when you're I was actually watching here in Bali a mother, two of her kids, and I don't know if they were twins or I couldn't understand what they were saying, but they were riding on bikes as kids, like as they do here. They both fell off the bike and the little girl got picked up by the mum. They would have been around the same age. The little girl got picked up by the mum. She was crying. She was like upset, and the mum was like, it's okay, or whatever she was saying. I'm assuming it was something soothing in Indonesian. And the little boy, she was like patting him on the back and kind of like gave him a little tap of like, I acknowledge you, but like, you're good. And I watched that and I was like, ooh, that's, I think that culture is a big influence on things like that. I know that in Western society, I've observed things to that degree or worse in Australia. And I think that then to teach people, men, women, but especially men, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's strong to be vulnerable and feel, is directly conflicting with like upbringing and childhood, which is a lot of like the things that shape us and form our psyche. I will never experience life as a male because I'm female, and I want to know your thoughts on what I just said, like about the vulnerability and the expectations to show strength through vulnerability when you have, like, maybe it's foreign, maybe it's not.
I think like I might be a black sheep in this scenario. And again, I think just because I have such radical and relentless ownership and accountability that if I want to change something, I'll change it because I want to.
Yeah.
So I was asked this question about my feelings on masculinity, and my response was I don't have an opinion and I don't fucking care.
Interesting.
Because I'm very vulnerable, very soft. I grew up with a mum and 2 sisters, so I've been surrounded by feminine energy a lot. I'll probably cry once or twice a week. I've posted me crying on social media. Not a video of me like,
Just
oh, wait
bawling.
a second, guys, let me cry. Yeah, but like a photo of vulnerability
I
of
have
how I
too.
was feeling or
Yeah.
sharing that.
It's
And
powerful.
yeah, it's interesting because my childhood was neither one or the other. It wasn't surrounded by very feminine. I was very into like motorbikes and, you know, camping and all that stuff, but it wasn't very heavy on the don't talk about your feelings, don't talk about this and don't talk about that. But again, tying back into my...
Societal level though.
I don't feel the pressure.
Interesting though that you said, I love that, by the way. I don't want to just like
No,
not acknowledge that.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
when you said your thoughts on masculinity, the words, like the content of the words you were saying, I'm like, okay, he doesn't have thoughts, but the energy behind it like felt almost aversion. And I'm wondering, does the word masculinity have some sort of connotation to it for you? Because when I hear masculinity, I think of stability, I think of safety, I think of direction, I think of the doing, I think of the striving and the going and power and strength and all of that. But by the same token, there's strength and power, but more surrender and yielding and receiving in feminine energy. I think that as a male, you possess masculine and feminine energy. As a female, I possess masculine and feminine energy. It's not like it's yin and yang kind of vibe.
I love the level of depth behind the question because I answered it on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So I always, and I've talked a lot about masculine and feminine energy, males and females being able to go into both. But it's not often I'm asked that question about masculinity with the depth that you just said. So with no disrespect with the way I answered it as if you didn't ask it with that depth, but I assumed that it was asked in the sense of, yeah, macho masculinity, being a man, not sharing emotions. And I don't know why my brain locked onto that.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly with all the things you said then about masculinity. But for the general population,
The connotation is that,
it wouldn't
Yeah.
be understood in that light. A lot of people tuning in, if you said, what is masculinity? Not to speak for people, but I would assume from my experience of conversations in the past, they would go down the route that I went down. So that's why I answered
macho
that.
man and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. That's why, okay, that gives insight into why, like I said, the content of your words, I was like, I understand that you don't have an opinion, but there seemed like there was an underlying, like,
Great probe.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I guess I could have a perspective of masculinity protective. Like, I don't give a fuck about it because of the toxic masculinity, men don't share emotions and all that. But then also, it's just one of those things with maybe labels or those thoughts where I don't dive into them too much. And when I say I don't give a fuck, it's because I just do what I do. So I don't necessarily sit there and go, oh, I'm in my masculine today and that's my feminine. It's like if I want to protect a partner and then I want to cry after, that's just what I want to do, or that's just what I'm going to do. I don't necessarily differentiate, oh, that was a masculine act and that's a feminine act. Does that make sense?
I think it's less about the labeling and more about the feeling. And feeling has like a feminine connotation to it, but you can feel into your masculine, lean into your masculine. And like, for example, when I want to get like zone in and just like do a big 40-minute spurt of intense like work, I'm heavily leaning and feeling into my masculine energy, and the feeling, like sensations in my body that I feel when I'm in that versus how I feel in my body compared to when I'm yielding. And any woman, I think, will tell you that like when, for example, like if we're walking alone at night, which we generally don't do, if there's someone walking behind us, we'll feel activated. Like you feel that energy in your body. You feel like that sense of like protectiveness that I would considered as masculine energy because I'm like ready to go. Compared to that kind of surrender and like relaxed. And
what does tapping into those conscious differentiation thoughts do for you though? So if you know you're going to do a work stint and you want it to be purposeful and it's like, yeah, I'm going to tap into my masculine, like, do you feel the need to have to consciously?
No.
So, in a weird question, why? Oh, I don't even know how to word this. What's the point then of thinking in those ways? Now, that's not to say I don't think it's valuable or I don't agree with it. This is just a curiosity question of, if you don't consciously do it, then what's the need to reflect on it in that light?
Can you phrase it more bluntly? Because I feel like you're tiptoeing around it in some way.
Not intentionally, just
Okay.
more so that I didn't know how to word it.
Yeah.
But if you don't consciously tap into those thoughts before doing it, what's the point of having those separated thoughts in reflection? Like, what does that do for you?
I think for me personally, it's less about like what it does for me personally, more about removing the connotations of like masculinity versus femininity, because again, we're all interconnected. All of that stuff like exists in everyone and everything. Like the two aren't mutually exclusive. There's not just masculine and just feminine. They're both. And I think that like when we start to understand that, when I say like tap into things, you don't consciously sit down and be like, I'm going to tap into my feminine energy.
Yeah, okay.
But like in reflection, or especially like even in dating, a way that I used to know when, obviously like with the relationship that I had with my dad and a lot of my family, addiction, it's not safe. I continued to play out certain romantic dynamics, and a way I use to differentiate how am I contributing to a dynamic, because it's very easy to turn around and be like, oh, it's another one, like I was cheated on, and like make it all about them. But how am I contributing? Like, what am I attracted to? I would feel into my body and be like, what do I feel? Does this person allow me the space to drop into my feminine energy or not? And like when you can differentiate between the two, you can understand more about yourself and more about the world. And it also contributes like way beyond that too, because when you start to understand more about yourself and the world as like whole and dynamic and fluctuating and flexible beings, we can start to break down the stigma behind things that perpetuate hurt and pain, like the toxic masculinity stuff, the not expressing things, and yeah, just ultimately like make things a little bit more peaceful and enjoyable, I guess.
Do you feel the feminine masculine is more thought or feeling?
Feeling.
So it's almost by breaking it down or understanding the two different factors, it's the psychoanalyzing of emotions, in a sense.
Similar, yeah.
Too many people are passionate about something, but allow themselves to be held back by their own mind, their own fear.
So when you're kids, or when you're a child, you possess like all of the wonder, like you're experiencing things for the first time. Often kids, like I don't know any child that hasn't played imaginary games, and like you're experiencing things, it's exciting and you're creative and all that stuff. And then slowly as you get older and you're conditioned, even in small ways, if you grow up around like the most beautiful, wonderful family, it's virtually impossible, like we were saying, not to pass down some kind of trauma onto your kids. As a child or as a human being experiencing life for the first time, things are validated that steer you towards certain directions and make you fear other directions, either like inadvertently through like lack of validation or love or any of that that's important when you're a child. And I think as we grow older, sometimes because of the thick conditioning from friends, family, strangers, media, a big one now, it means that we're more ruled by our fears than our passions. And it takes radical accountability and a big lot of bravery and courage to chase after things that you're passionate about, because especially if you're conditioned to steer away from them.
One thing I find super interesting is the idea that you can have something as a kid, you lose it, and then to be a thriving or successful adult, it can be gaining that back, and specifically curiosity. As a kid, you have natural curiosity.
Yeah.
which I got goosebumps then. That was weird.
Don't, because now I do too.
I always get them. My friends always hang shit on me because every episode I'll always say like goosebumps or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that idea that as a kid you're naturally curious and then life shows you some shit things or some logical things or some things that you're forced to fit into that you lose your curiosity. But the most successful humans I've seen are ones who work on the skill of gaining that back or building that back.
And harnessing the stuff that maybe we're conditioned to weed out or steer away from.
It's so interesting that you said that about the children, because it was something I thought about recently, and I talked about it, that a lot of lacking progress in adults, and specifically mindset or lifestyle or future self or self-relationship, is just a lack of curiosity. It's being fearful of emotions. It's being fearful of change. So many people would see so much progress in their life if they're a little bit more curious of trying something different. Because
100% agree, yeah.
if you do the same thing, you'll see the same thing. And I have this quote that I always say, that real change needs real change. And that's why people in weight loss challenges don't actually change, because they're just doing a different system under
short term.
Under the same backing dynamics. But if they got curious as to why they need to lose weight, why they are in that position, why they aren't successful with it, why it's such a struggle, and had curiosity to change some of those things, their outcome would result in real change.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing as well, because I think when we look at the root of, especially things tied to body image, it can be hard as well when people get to the root of like, why is this important to me? It can be as surface level as I want to look good and I want to feel good, or it can be like so much deeper than that, depending on how far you dig.
What's one piece of advice, thought, or question that you want my audience to think of or ask themselves more into that camera there?
The space between comfort and discomfort is where you're going to grow the most. And I know that people think that chasing discomfort is where they grow. I would agree to an extent, but I would say if you can find the edge of comfort and discomfort where they meet, sit there and wait and build on that, and then you go a little bit more.
What a great episode. What a great episode.
This is such a nice conversation. I feel really energized.
Appreciate so much your time for doing this.
And yours too.
That I can't wait to get it out there. I'll link your socials in the description. Anyone who tuned in on Spotify, I appreciate you. Obviously, I looked at the camera and you can't see me. Anyone who tuned in on YouTube, you know I adore you, because YouTube is where it matters most. That is episode 7 with Charli. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.